Hey guys, quick heads up before I start the video. The link down below takes you to my Patreon, where you can download the project files for this video. Also gain access to my premium tutorials and in-depth courses where we build games together from start to finish. Check out my Patreon below, gain direct access to years of experience so that you can start working on your dream game tomorrow. Hello guys and welcome back to a new episode of my multiplayer Bean Battle Royale tutorial series. So in the last episode we set up a couple of different things actually. So we set up AO, so now the characters here can basically look up and down. And that's important because then when we start to equip weapons, we can actually use that AO to point up and down in our third-person shooter here. And then also what we did as well, so we can spawn items here, and we could also do that previously, right? But then what we did is that we can now actually look at the items and then interact with them. So what do I mean by that? We now actually have the ability to equip them. So if I look at this assault rifle here with the server on the right and then press E, then we see that the weapon deletes itself in the world and then attaches itself here to the character. So now we got this this gun here basically, and then on the client we can see that we can also look up and down and in all directions. And then here with the client as well, we can simply pick up a gun. So this one picks up a little pistol, it attaches itself, and there we go. Now we already prepared a couple of things, such as the ability that we can get weapons on the back, but we did not actually code the functionality for that. So we already got some things in place, but we still need to actually finish that and code that. And then right now in our system, that's basically where we stopped, because now we got to the part where we also need to be able to swap weapons. So we need to be able to press 1 or 2 to get your main weapon or your secondary weapon. So we basically can say we have a slot 1 and a slot 2. Because right now what happens if I just look with a pistol here at the assault rifle, pick it up, then it simply deletes the entire pistol and swaps it out. So what we want in that case is that if the back slot is empty, then we want that weapon that we now picked up, so the assault rifle in that case, to then go on the back. But in the case that both your hand is full and your back is full, then we're simply going to replace the active slot. So if we have an AK in our hand and an AK on our back and we pick up a pistol, then we just swap out the AK in our hand with a pistol, and then we should also drop that weapon that we have into the world. So we also need the functionality to drop weapons or to drop them when we swap them out. So let's go ahead and get started on that. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to find our character blueprint here, so the core character, and we're simply going to set it all up in here. So this is still our logic from the last video. So first of all, we need a couple of extra inputs. So if we go here to edit and then project settings, then if we head over to input, then we see our action mappings category here. So the first one that we're going to add, let's call it slot 1. So this one we switch to slot 1. Now if we click here and then click 1 on the keyboard, then that's what we want. So slot 1 switches to the first weapon that we have, and then we have slot 2, which we want to assign to keyboard button 2, and then we also want to drop them, like I said. So we also want something like a drop tool. I think that's a good description, and then we'll put that to keyboard button G. So we got 1, 2, and G. So we got slot 1, slot 2, and drop tool. So then we head over to our character and we simply get them into the graph. So we type in slot 1, action event, slot 2, action event, and then we have drop tool as new inputs here. So I'm gonna spread them out a little bit, just like that. And then in the last video, we saw that we made this little current weapon. So here we have the event, the interface event for when we pick up an pickup item, then the ID comes through here. So this is basically where we can start to handle the logic for putting it into slot 1 or into slot 2. And all of that type of logic that basically comes off of here, since this handles the pickup. And then in here we had some functionality. So basically off of the current weapon, which will then hold an ID of a weapon, we're going to find that ID in our data table. And then we said we're going to get the blueprint class, and then we set up our active weapon with that. Well, in this video we need a bit more than that. So we also need to say that we basically want to be able to swap out the active weapon, and we also want to be able to set the non-active weapon in our back slot here. So what I'm going to do is that I'm simply going to remove the whole variable, and then also remove it here, and then click yes, and also remove this on-wrap current weapon, and this setup for the weapon, this one we can keep it. Compile and save, and there we go. Okay, so then up next we're basically, so the way to start coding this, well, first of all, we need a couple of extra variables, 2 actually. So we're going to make a variable and let's call it inventory. We could also call it something like, let's say, toolbar or something like that, right? But this all depends on how you want to code your game. I want to use it as an inventory right now, so we'll call it inventory, and then we're going to make this a string array, and then we want to make this of the type wrap notify, so that whenever we change this array, so whenever we input other items inside of this array, basically, we just want to be able to update both the client and the server. So that's why we're going to make it a wrap notify. Then we can use this function here later down the line for when our data changes. And then the next one is going to be our active slot. This is going to be of the type integer, and it's going to be a single integer. And this also, we want to make this a wrap notify. So now we have 2 new wrap notifies. So at this point, we basically just need to start handling our logic here. So let's start by handling our pickup event over here. So what are we going to do? Well, we're basically going to say, here comes an ID, and then here we have our inventory. And then we're going to say, in this case, we got 2 weapons right now. So it all depends on how you code your game, of course, and you can code things in many ways, but we're just going to code this specific setup that we want for this Bean Battle Royale right now. But what we're going to say is that the inventory is going to have 2 weapons. So we have index 0 and index 1. And then index 0 can basically hold an ID. So if this holds ID 1, that means that we have an assault rifle in index 0. And then if index 1 here holds an ID of 2, that means that we are holding a pistol in 2. But what we can also have is that we have an ID of 1 and another ID of 1, in which case we basically akimbo assault rifles. So what we're going to do here is we're going to drag off and type in get, and then we're going to get a copy of the index 0. And also do keep in mind that you actually need to already pre-make these. So we're going to click here too and leave them empty. So we're going to get 0, and then we're going to drag out of here and simply type in is empty. So we're going to check if we have a weapon or not at index 0, which is also similar to slot 1. So index 0 is slot 1, index 1 is slot 2. But when it works with, when you're working with array and indexes, then you have a 0 count in Unreal Engine and in any other programming language basically. So keep that in mind. So 0 is 1 and 1 is 2. So if slot 0 is empty, then we're going to hold B and left click. And then we're going to branch off of here. And then in this case, we're going to say that we want to set an array element. So if you drag in our array, we're going to type in set array element. So if slot 0 is empty, then we want to set slot 0 to the incoming ID. So if we don't have anything in there, then we want to put our assault rifle in there. And then if we do that, and then we also have to wrap notify properly. So then after here, we need to get this one again, and then we need to do set array. So this one. So not only do we need to actually set the array element, but for that to come true in a wrap notify, after doing this, we also need to call this. That's simply how it works in our engine. It's a bit of a bug, kind of, you could consider it, because here we already set it, which means we already changed it. But for that to actually properly come true, we're going to have to basically plug in this one into the set here again after changing it. Otherwise it just exists on the server only and doesn't actually properly come true. Okay, and then we move on. So then in the scenario that index 0 is not empty, that means that we basically already have a weapon in index 0. And in that case, we then want to put the other weapon that we're going to be picking up into slot 2. So if there is an empty slot, basically, then we put the next incoming weapon there. So we're going to copy paste all of this, and then here we're going to change it to a 1 for index 1. We're going to branch again, and then we're going to hook this up. So in the case that 1 is empty, then we want to say that it is 1 where we basically want to set the array element. So in that case, we're going to go off of here and set this one. So to go over it once more, we have nothing in our hands. The first assault rifle gets picked up. gets put into slot 1, which means index 0. And then the next weapon gets picked up. So let's say a pistol. Then we say, slot 1 is no longer empty. We're already holding an assault rifle there. Then check if slot 2 is empty. If slot 2 is empty, then we're going to put this pistol into slot 2. So then make sure that here we set it to index 1 in this case. And then the last scenario here, that basically means that we don't have any empty slot anymore. So this last scenario, that means that we already have an item in both slot 1 and in slot 2. And in that case, what we want to do is that we want to basically swap out the weapon that we are currently holding. So in order to swap out the weapon that we're currently holding, that means that we basically first of all want to drop that weapon. So we want to get that weapon that we're holding into the world. And then we want to basically swap out the actual weapon in that slot with the new incoming weapon. So first of all, to drop the current weapon that we have, we're going to drag out of here and type in spawn actor from class. And then the class is going to be our pickup, let's see here, PP pickup item. So then the collision here, we're going to set that to try to adjust location, but always spawn. And then for the spawn transform, so wherever we want to spawn this, we're going to say we want to spawn it at the location of this active weapon. So if we type in here, get actor or get location, and then the world location. So this one goes in here, and this one goes here. And then the ID here that is basically incoming is the ID of the weapon that we're currently holding. So how can we get the ID that we're currently holding? Well, we basically know what our active slot is. So by default, it's 0. And then just in a little bit, when we start to switching here with the input, so if you click 1, it changes to 0. If you click 2, it changes to 1. And then basically, so how do we get the current weapon that we're holding? Well, we're going to get the inventory, and then we're going to simply type in get, and then we're going to get the one that is at the active index. So this out of here basically returns the current weapon that we're holding. So that goes in here so that we drop the weapon with the correct pickup ID that we're currently holding. And then we're going to say if the incoming weapon is different, so not exactly equal to the one that we're holding, so this logic again, then in that case, we're going to say that we want to set the array element, so this one, with the active index here, to the incoming item, so to this item. Here we go. And this will all make sense in a little bit when we actually start to see it in action. But to go over it once more, if slot 1 is empty, then we put the item in slot 1. If slot 1 is not empty, then if slot 2 is empty, we put the item in slot 2. If slot 2 is not empty either, then we drop the item we're currently holding, and we basically swap that item out with the new incoming item. So that means in the active index, so if we are in index in slot 2, so in index 1, then we're going to swap that one out with the incoming ID of the new weapon. But if we are in index 0, so slot 1, then we are going to swap that one out with the incoming ID. So yeah, I know it might be a little bit confusing, but just follow along. So then we hit compile and save. And then next up, we actually need to code the logic so that we actually be able to set the weapon in here. So this is just logic for handling the pickup essentially. So now we're going to open up our inventory here, and then we're going to code the rep notify. Check out Cactus Center right now on Steam and Early Access. It's a very fun multiplayer video game, cheaper than a Starbucks coffee. So if you want to have a good time with your friends or strangers, click that link down below, and I appreciate every single one of you, and enjoy the rest of the video. Bye! So there is two things that we need to do. So because of that, we're going to hold S and then left click. And what are these two things that we need to do? Well, we need to basically handle the active weapon and set that one to be correct based on whatever active slot we have and based on our inventory. And then also based on that, we need to basically set our back slot weapon. So based on the active slot, we can then determine what is the weapon that we are not currently holding. And that one needs to go on our back, because that's typically what you see in Battle Royales. So first of all, to handle this, this active weapon over here, we need to set up this actor here with the correct blueprint. So yet again, we're going to do the same trick. We're going to get our inventory and then type in get. And then we're going to get the item at the current active slot. And then what we're going to do is get data table row. So this one. hook this up, and then the data table is our pickup item. So first of all, we want to find the current weapon that we're holding inside of our inventory here. So then this basically returns the ID here of the item that we are supposed to be holding right now. So out of here comes that item that we are supposed to be holding, but now we need to actually set it in here. So how do we do that? Well, if the row is found, then we can simply drag in the active weapon, and then we're going to say set child actor class, which essentially sets this blueprint over here to this blueprint over here. So this, we hook it up like this. And then, as we saw earlier in the last video, we made this little function here called setup weapon, which upon actually setting the weapon in here, so upon setting the correct class in here, we're then going to cast to that weapon. We're going to set ourselves as the character, as the owner of the weapon. Then we're going to set up the weapon with reference of our character, and that is actually so that the weapon can use and bind itself to these on primary and on reload events. And then we're going to call a function on that actor, so a function on the weapon that actually sets the weapon itself up with the correct things. So it sets the correct static mesh. And what else did it do? Well, we can see it in here. Yeah, so it sets the correct static mesh, and then this actually handles the binding based off of that character reference, so that we can have primary handling and reload handling. And so then back in the rep notify, then after this setting of the child actor, we simply want to call this function that we already made called setup weapon. Now, in the case that we are basically in a slot where we do not find the weapon, so let's say that we are in slot 1, but we dropped the weapon that is in slot 1, then that means that this inventory slot here will return empty. So this will not return 1, 2, or 3 as an ID. It returns simply nothing as an ID. And in that case, we say row is not found. And if the row is not found, then we want to copy paste this, and then we want to set the active weapon back to nothing. So we basically want to clear it again so that nothing is displayed there. So that's basically how we handle this active weapon. And then at the same time, we also need to handle the weapon on our back. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to drag in our inventory, and we're simply going to for each loop. So we're going to hold F and left click. You can also simply type in for each loop. And then we're going to hook this up and hook this up over here. And then we're going to go looking for the item that is basically, we're going to be looking for the weapon that is not currently the one in our active slot. So the way that we're going to do that is that if we loop through this, we want to find an array index that is not equal. So if you do the is sign and then is not equal to our active slot. So this way we can then basically find the one that is supposed to be our back slot. Then if we hold B to branch and then left click, so B and left click, then we're now going to do similar logic as what we see here. So we can select this, copy paste it. So off of the true, when this is not the same, then we want to plug this ID into here. And then we say, okay, so this is the weapon that's supposed to be on our back. So for that, we're going to drag in this static mesh, drag out of it, and type in set static mesh. So if the row is found for this one, then we're going to hook up the static mesh out of here, there. And then if it is not found, then we want to do the same. Then we basically want to set the static mesh here to nothing. So here we set the child actor to nothing because the one that we're holding is actually a blueprint, so we can shoot with it and stuff. But the one that's on our back does not have to be a blueprint, so that is simply just a static mesh. And there we go. Now we're going to hit compile and save. And that's that. So this is basically all that handling. So what you can do is you can basically select it all, just like this, and then you can right click and we can call it something like process item pickup. So this function here processes an item pickup. Now when you do that, you see that all of these pins get created, but they basically all come from the ID. So over here inside of the graph, if we just hold control, we can drag all of them into the first pin, just like this. Then we can remove the unnecessary pins, and then we're going to rename this one to item. Let's call it incoming item ID. So this is the incoming item ID, and then this is our logic here. Then we're going to hit compile and save, and then we see that we got a bit of errors. That's because then we see this node here needs to be refreshed. So if we select it, right click, hit refresh node, compile, save, then there we go. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, we can then basically also handle us setting up the correct slots. So for setting the slots, we know that first of all, these are just inputs. So these happen on the local version of the character. When working with rep notifies, which both of these variables are, we need to be always setting them on the server. So the first thing we're going to do is make a custom event, and we're going to call it sr_switch slot, sr standing for server. Then over here under replicates, we're going to do run on server reliable. Then we're going to put this a little bit to the right. And then we're going to say basically that we want to set the active slot here. So the active slot can go in here. There we go. Then hit compile and save. So whenever we press 1, we want to set our active slot to 1. So off of here, simply type in sr switch slot. So remember, slot 1 is index 0. And then when we want to go to slot 2, then we're going to set our active index here to 1. So that's basically how we handle that. Now the dropping of the tool we'll do in just a second. So what do we need to do here? Well, whenever we switch a slot, we essentially want to do the same processing of the item logic, but not this part, but actually the part that we have inside of here. So this part over here is basically for actually updating our current weapons that we have equipped. So what we're going to do is that we're going to select this whole function, right click, and then collapse to function. And then we're going to call this update, let's call it update weapons. I think that's fine. Or you can call it update inventory or equipment or something like that. So on rep notify of the inventory, we're simply going to call this beautiful function that we made, because the function basically sets this blueprint and this static mesh up with the correct information. But whenever we want to switch the slot, we basically want to do the same. So whether we pick an item up and then that makes changes to what we're currently holding, or whether we're switching slots, that basically has to do the same. So inside of this rep notify here, we're also going to simply drag in this function called update weapon, hit compile and save. And then we do want to keep in mind that, for example, players can keep pressing 1 and they can keep pressing 2. So every time that they press 1, we don't necessarily want to update the weapon all the time. So in order to basically say that we only want to update the weapon whenever there's actually a new weapon in our hand, then what we can do is that if we keep pressing 0, but if we're already 0, then we simply want to ignore that. So to do that, we can verify if the incoming active slot here is not equal to the current active slot. And then only in that case, we actually want to set the active slot to the new incoming value. So if you're 0 and already 0, then we're just going to ignore you. But if you are 0 and you're switching to 1, then that means it's not the same. And then we're actually going to set it here. So that's that. And then hit compile and save. So now we already have the ability to basically pick up weapons, and then we can already swap out weapons, but only by picking them up. So yeah, so now we also want the ability for the player to simply drop the weapon whenever they feel like it. So for that, we're going to, let's make a function actually here, and we're going to call this drop weapon. And then this also needs to happen on the server, of course. So we're going to make a custom event called sr drop current weapon. And then this, we want to run it on the server reliably. And simply whenever we press G, we simply want to call sr drop current weapon. And then here we can put our little function. And then we can code this. So I'll put this like, let's put it over here. Okay, so now let's code the logic for us being able to actually drop our current weapon. So first of all, we need to yet again know what our current weapon is. So if we get our inventory and then get the one out of our inventory that is the active slot, then we know what our current weapon is. And then we're going to say, is it empty? So we of course cannot drop a weapon whenever the current weapon is empty. So if we branch off of here, then we're going to say if it is not empty, that means we're actually holding a weapon. In that case, we can actually drop something. So yet again, whenever we drop something, we want to spawn an actor from class, and that's going to be the pickup item again. And then the handling for the collision is going to be try to adjust but always spawn. The transform, it's going to be the same again. So we're simply going to get the active weapon world location. So this one, plug that into here. And There we go. And then the item ID here is of course then the item that we are currently holding. So the item that we're currently holding is what we're going to be dropping. And then since we dropped the weapon, we also need to update our actual inventory. So when players drop weapons, inventory needs to change, of course. So then if we check in this one, then let's go ahead and copy this logic over. So here we go. So what does this logic do? Well, basically the active slot, so we're holding an assault rifle in slot in active slot index 0. And then we want to set index 0 to nothing and then update that we have nothing in our hand. And then how does that go? So we have nothing in our hand. This updates, calls this function that says, okay, get the one at 0 now, which we just set to nothing, right? So this returns nothing, goes off of row not found, clears our weapon. So then we can go ahead, close all of these events and functions and stuff. And then we can basically give this all a little test. So this is the logic here for actually being able to swap weapons. So I'm going to do 2 players, distance server, hit play. And now let's get them over here and hope that we get some good loot. So we got this guy over here. Okay, so client here on the left opens the box. There's an AK, there's one pistol, and there's another AK. So the client picks up the AK. AK is now in our hand. The client can then press 2. AK is then on my back. I can then press 1 again. AK is in my hand. If I then press G, then I drop the weapon at the current weapon location. So now the weapon is on the floor. I can then pick the weapon up again. I can then also ask the client to pick up a pistol, which then gets put on my back. And then here as the server, I can pick up this other assault rifle. So we both see that we are holding certain weapons. I can put it on my back. I can hold it in my hand. I can press G to drop it, pick it up again. And then the client here can also change weapons. So I'm now holding an assault rifle in slot 1. And then if I press slot 2, then I'm swapping out and holding a pistol. I can then drop my pistol, go to slot 1, hold my AK, and then I can basically go like this. And then I can also swap out the weapons. So basically let's do that. So this guy will drop the AK and then we can swap an AK for an AK. So I can just look at the AK, click, and then we swap the AK for an AK. Or here on the client, if I press 2, I get my pistol and then I can swap my pistol for an AK. And then as the client, I now have 2 AKs. So that's pretty funny. And then this one has a little pistol, hands up. Okay. So yeah, that's basically it for this video, guys. It was a quick one, but a cool one, right? Because we have some cool functionality now of being able to interact with these weapons and items that come from these loot boxes. So in the next video, we are going to be actually setting up the functionalities that we can start shooting. So we're going to be coding the assault rifle, and then I think we're also going to be coding the pistol itself. And then, yeah, we can start shooting each other. Once we start shooting each other, players will start to die, of course. At that point, we then want to have, we want to finish up the logic inside of the game state so that the game can actually come to an end and that a winner can be concluded. And also, if we take a look at typical battle royales, we still need the whole blue zone that becomes smaller in intervals. So basically, the timer goes 1 minute, you got 1 minute, then the new zone starts, and eventually you got a super small zone, bringing all the players together so that they can kill each other and that a winner can be created, basically. So that's what we're going to be working on in the next parts. I hope you guys enjoyed this part, and if you did, you can of course download the project on my Patreon. You can then mess with it yourself or make adjustments if needed. I appreciate all of you guys. Hit the like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!